We have several more signings to discuss, including contracts for Strome Marino, Dylan Strome, and Travis Hamonic. Plus, we also have some updated rumors on the Pierre Luc Dubois situation with the Columbus Blue Jackets, and we could see a trade that almost happened before between the Isles and Wild revisited. We'll discuss all the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of things to discuss today. Let's dive right in and get started. First up, the Minnesota Wild have named a new team captain. They've named defenseman Jared Spurgeon, the successor to Mikko Koivu, of course, who is no longer with the club, who departed via free agency after the Wild informed him that they would not be renewing his contract. So Spurgeon, pretty good selection in my opinion. Not the guy who I really thought they would go with. I thought they might go with a more experienced guy like a Ryan Suter, for example. But obviously Bill Guerin had other ideas. We know that Spurgeon just recently inked a long-term deal, so he's expected to be with the Wild for an extended period of time. But not really the kind of guy that kind of jumps out as being, a big, rah-rah, rile up the guys kind of captain. I think he's going to be more of the captain that kind of leads more by example. Pretty solid both ends of the ice. And obviously, like I said, somebody that the Wild view as a pretty good character player. So obviously that's not news we expected to get here today, but obviously some of these teams are announcing their choice of leadership groups and captains, via social media, obviously, since they're not having a lot of normal media days like they normally would because of everything that's all the restrictions here. Now, the Senators also announced their leadership group. They're going to go another season without a captain, but they basically have it narrowed down to Brady Tkachuk and Thomas Chabot. No big surprise there. They are going to name those two guys as alternate captains along with newly signed defenseman Eric Branson. Obviously, they acquired him in the offseason. Those are going to be your three alternates for the season, but Coach DJ Smith basically said that they see either Tkachuk or Chabot being the next captain of the Senators, and they want to take another year to kind of see how it plays out and decide who is going to get the C. But that's kind of their vision for the team here moving forward. I also think they kind of want to make sure they get Tkachuk locked up long term as well. Since he's entering the final year of his entry-level deal, he'll need a new contract before next season, and obviously they probably want to get that lined up as well, and then if they can get him and Chabot's already signed long term, then they can make a choice and kind of go from there. But those two guys will be a big part of the team's future for quite some time now. Obviously, moving on to the signings we had today, we did get confirmation that Travis Hamonic has signed with the Vancouver Canucks. However, he's only signed on a professional tryout. He doesn't have an official contract as of yet, but I would assume, based on how everything sounds, that he will indeed get a one-year deal with Vancouver. A couple of things going on with the Canucks. Obviously, they did confirm that Michael Furlin will be going on long-term injury reserve. He's not going to be able to play. He's going to be on injury reserve for some time. He's still having a lot of issues with post-concussion syndrome, so it's difficult to say if or when he returns. So they will have a little bit of wiggle room with the cap because of that. Plus, they could make some other potential roster moves as well. They could also make some additional roster moves as well once we're further into training camp, ready to start the season. Like, we don't know if Louis Eriksson is going to be demoted or how things are going to work out in that regard as well. But basically, the way it's going to work with Hamonic is he'll travel into BC and he'll have to go into quarantine for a while. So he's only going to be able to join the team a couple of days before the season starts. So probably at most, he'll probably get like one, maybe two practices with the team before their first game. So I would think that if they're going to do that, they pretty well know that they're going to sign him. They probably see him as being somewhat of a replacement to Chris Tanev, not exactly the same kind of defenseman, but to a degree he can give a lot of the same features and contribute in the same sort of way. So we will see what they do. I would imagine it's not going to be a very expensive contract, probably under $1 million. Of course, we know Hamonic as well opted out of the return to play this past summer, and obviously he was preferred to play in Western Canada so he could be close to home. He's been linked to teams like the Canucks and the Jets. Of course, his PTO does give him flexibility as well, but I don't see a scenario unfolding where he doesn't sign with Vancouver. Now, of course, we finally got a signing out of Chicago. They got Dylan Strome looked after here right before their camp is getting ready to go. Of course, all of the other camps open today, but for the most part, the other teams that are opening camps today are doing a lot of off-ice stuff. Their first ice sessions likely tomorrow for a majority of them. So Strome signs a 2-year contract. Total value $6 million, so a $3 million average annual value. Of course, like all these other contracts we're seeing for RFAs, it's the second year's higher value, so it's backloaded. You get a $2.4 million salary for year one and a $3.6 million salary for year two. Gets him a higher qualifying offer and obviously allows the team to pay him more in next year instead of this year, which helps with their cash flow. So it's a win-win for both parties. So Strome was under contract. Obviously, losing guys like Doc and Taves is a big blow for Chicago, so they couldn't really go without getting him signed as well before the season gets underway. But Strome's going to be that much more important to them now with those losses of the other center iceman there. Now, like I mentioned as well, we also saw a pretty big extension in Pittsburgh today where they announced a long-term deal for John Marino, who signs a 6-year deal at $4.4 million average annual value. I mean, that's not something that we kind of saw coming because he still had a year left. He was eligible for an extension, but not something that they had to do here right away. Of course, Marino was originally an Oilers draft pick back in 2015, but he went the college hockey route, played at Harvard, and never ended up signing at Edmonton. Eventually signed with Pittsburgh as a free agent and had a pretty solid year last year. I think the Penguins obviously view him as being likely their future number one defenseman. I mean, I know, it's a lot of money, in my opinion, a lot of term for somebody who only has 56 games of NHL experience. I'm not saying he's a bad player. Don't get me wrong. Marino is a player with a bright future, and he certainly had a really good year as a rookie last season. I mean, I know he was very impressive, so not to say that this wasn't justified to some degree, but they could have waited a little bit longer to see if he could duplicate last season before they really went too long a term. But at the same time, you wait too long and he gets more good performances, then you're going to end up paying more for that as well. So you can kind of weigh out the risk and the benefits here, but I do think there's some risk associated. I just hope it works out and he turns out to be that future number one defenseman that they think they have in this youngster right now. Now, as I mentioned as well, we want to touch on Pierre Luc Dubois' situation again today. Now, I know he's a player we've talked a lot about in the last 2 or 3 days, ever since the news broke that he was, contemplating a change of scenery, that he might want out of Columbus. Then he eventually signed a 2-year contract. And as we got a lot of comments on that video saying, he just signed, he's not going anywhere, all kinds of things. And as I cautioned everybody, it's like, just because he signed, it doesn't really mean anything. And all the reports we had from insiders, including Pierre LeBrun, followed up by Aaron Portzline, but most of that information came from LeBrun, indicated that, he did want out of Columbus. And basically we got confirmation of that today between comments from head coach John Tortorella, as well as the player himself. There's no doubt that he did indeed put a trade request forward to the Jackets, and it does sound like he does want out. When Tortorella was asked about this during his media availability, he said that they would handle it the same sort of way that they handled Panarin and Bobrovsky back a couple off seasons ago when there was word going into camp that they weren't interested in re-signing and they were going to walk as free agents. He said they're going to handle it out in the open and as a team. Obviously, we've seen how that worked out before. It didn't really make any difference. They ended up leaving, just like the rumors suggested. They didn't want to be in Columbus. We really don't know a lot of the reasons why. There was a lot of different stories out there, from wanting to live in a bigger city, in a more high-profile market, to lifestyle. It's hard to say. I mean, there was some people that were saying that it was a combination of them not really getting along with the management or Tortorella, but there's all kinds of things, and we really don't know 100% what their reasons were. They both ended up signing separate places. At one point, it was highly rumored they were going to go as a package deal to a team as free agents, and that did not work out. Although it did come close, that was some of the negotiations that were going on. They were talking to a lot of the same teams, and it came close to happening, but they ended up going elsewhere separately, as we know. But at the end of the day, this is another situation. It's not a good look for the Jackets, in my opinion. They've had a lot of drama there in the last 2-3 years. Even before that, like I said, was guys like Ryan Johansson. Of course, they played hardball with Josh Anderson, got him a second contract, and then not long after, he was traded. So Dubois could be the next in line to do that. But when Dubois was asked for comments, he didn't really get into the specifics. Or really, he just kind of said he didn't want to be a distraction, and he was hoping he could just come to camp, be a good teammate, be a good player for the team, and do the best he can. And that he hoped it didn't get in the way of any of the team stuff and distracting in any shape or form. So based on those comments, nobody is denying the fact that this happened. So it did happen. So the reports that we had were indeed accurate, and we did also see reports today as well from Boston Hockey Now writer Jimmy Murphy indicating that he has sources saying that the Bruins are certainly another team that's interested in the services of Dubois should they be able to talk a trade. Now, of course, at this point, anybody who's inquired or showing interest in Dubois is only at the exploratory stages. There's no way that we have any rumors to suggest that teams are in deep talks with the Jackets and that a deal is anywhere near imminent. I don't get that feeling at all. I think it's going to be something that drags on for a while, but it is something that is likely to happen sometime when the right deal comes along, whether it be during the season, at the deadline, maybe it's next offseason, I don't know. But I would say sometime likely in the next year that he is definitely a player who wants out. So therefore, they're not going to want to keep a player that they know doesn't want to be there. Because they've already learned their lesson here, I would think, with Panarin and Bobrovsky and Duchesne and Dzingel and all the other guys that they brought in, and then they had that mass exodus. They're not going to want to have that happen again. They depleted a lot of their picks and prospects, and they won a series, which was great, first one in franchise history, but they didn't really go that far, and in my opinion, I'm not really sure it was worth it, but I guess they may feel different about that. I don't know. But the Bruins, it makes a lot of sense. Obviously, he could be the successor to David Krejci, the number 2 center. Krejci's entering the final year of his contract. Even if he does re-sign with the Bruins, then clearly he would take less money. And if he could move down to be that number 3 center on a more team-friendly contract, that could be something that works. But the only thing you have to question and ask yourself is, what would they offer Columbus in a trade if they go down that route? I mean, you might think that winger Jake DeBrusk, whose name has been in and out of the trade room, could be involved. I mean, they are pretty well set on the blue line, but they might want a defenseman. They could look to some younger players on the team, maybe a Vakanainen, who we know was made available before. They could also look to a top prospect like a Jack Studnicka. I mean, Studnicka might be a non-starter for Boston. I know he's a player they have really high hopes for, and they may not want to go down that road. Obviously, and they don't have a ton of high-end prospects. The Boston Bruins have been contending for Stanley Cups for some time and have traded away a lot of picks, and they don't really have a deep prospect pool, in my opinion, so not really sure exactly what they could put together for a trade package to offer Columbus to really, truly entice them. I mean, I guess they could throw in a future first-round pick, and other things that they have, like I mentioned here. Maybe it's a combination of DeBrusk, Vakanainen in a first. I don't know. I really don't know exactly what the Jackets would want, but I would assume they're going to want a young player who can give them something close to what Dubois has given them. As much as that is going to be hard to find, if they want to get a deal done, it's going to have to be compromised here a little bit. But the Bruins, according to Murphy, are a team that's interested and are in the exploratory phase of things, which is not a big surprise. There's a lot of teams that fit that bill. Like I mentioned, Winnipeg is a prime example. Teams that are rebuilding like Ottawa, Detroit, they would have interest too. Only makes sense when you're on the way up. A guy like that, he's still quite young, and he's obviously more established than a guy who was just drafted. So you can kind of accelerate your team a little bit by adding a dynamic player like that. So we'll see where this goes. Obviously, we may not get many more updates now that the media availability to start the season is kind of out of the way. We've learned a little bit more about this, and until things kind of intensify a little bit and we get more of the rumor mill about what other teams might be showing interest or what deals that could possibly happen. Now, another deal that we saw almost happen before the NHL trade deadline that apparently, according to Arthur Staple, he feels is something that could be revisited sometime throughout this season is a Wild Islanders deal. Of course, Staple covers the Islanders, and they came close to swapping a couple of longtime NHL veterans with not-so-friendly contracts in the Wild's Zach Parise and the Islanders' Andrew Ladd. Now, it was not an exact one-for-one trade. There was some other pieces involved, and it got complicated due to the cap implications and the money going back and forth, which is why it never happened. But at the NHL deadline, those two teams had pretty deep discussions and were really, really close to making that happen. Of course, Lou Lamoriello, the GM of the Islanders, had Parise in New Jersey for a long time when he was much younger, very familiar with the player, and it was known as well that the Parise had talked to the Wild about an opportunity to kind of move on and have a chance to try to win a Stanley Cup and go, on a deeper playoff run with another team before his career is up. I mean, he's getting into his later 30s now. The Wild are a team that's kind of going through almost like a rebuild, but not exactly a full-fledged rebuild. I think they're kind of retooling. I'm not sure how much better they're going to be this year. They may get away with making some improvements because obviously they're going to be playing in the Western Division. So they're going to be playing those California teams that are kind of going through rebuilds as well. So difficult to say where the Wild fit this year, but at the end of the day, they're not really close, in my opinion, to being a cup contender. So it makes sense for a guy like Parise to move on, but he has more term and more money left on his contract than Andrew Ladd does. He's a year older, and he has more term. So obviously for a team like the Islanders to swap that out and take that on, they're going to need something additional for doing so. So that's the complicated part. But Staple feels with the Johnny Boychuk retirement and that extra money going on long-term injury reserve, that gives them a little bit more flexibility. And even though they don't have a ton of cap space, if you swap Ladd out for Parise, and if they figure out a way to either retain salary on Minnesota's side or take another contract or something to kind of even out the money, then it's not really all that complicated, or it could be a scenario that even if the Islanders do take on slightly more of the money than Minnesota does, they could have enough of a wiggle room there with the LTIR to possibly even make it work. So let me know your thoughts on that trade scenario, and if you think those teams should explore it and possibly try to make it happen this year since they were so close before. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing and turning on your notifications so you don't miss any future content. This video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. I'd appreciate it if you did. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.